You've probably called yourself lazy. Maybe not out loud, but it's there, in the tension you feel when the day slips away and you've done nothing but stare at a screen, scroll through distractions, or sit paralyzed by your own expectations. You know what needs to be done. You even want to do it, but your body doesn't move. Your thoughts feel heavy. Time feels loud, and instead of understanding why, you punish yourself for what you didn't accomplish. You tell yourself you're broken, that you're falling behind, that something is wrong with you because everyone else seems to be moving, working, building, pushing forward, while you're stuck in some invisible mud. You look in the mirror and see laziness, but what you're really seeing is a nervous system in distress. What you're calling laziness is something much older, much deeper, something protective, because you weren't lazy. You were in survival mode, and survival mode doesn't care about deadlines or discipline. It doesn't care about ambition or goals. It only cares about keeping you safe. When the world has felt unsafe for too long, when your mind is overloaded, your body exhausted, and your inner world filled with pressure, you don't shut down because you're lazy. You shut down because that's what your nervous system was trained to do to survive. But no one told you that. They just handed you productivity tips and told you to hustle harder. So you kept fighting your biology, shaming your own defense mechanisms and wondering why it still felt like failure. This isn't a motivation problem. It's a misunderstanding of how pain rewires your will to act. You didn't end up here because you're weak. You ended up here because you adapted. From the moment you were young, you learned something dangerous without ever being told it directly, that your value is conditional. Conditional on being useful, on being pleasant, on being productive, that love, attention and safety had to be earned, not with your presence, but with your performance. So you started performing. Maybe it began with doing well in school, being the responsible one, the overachiever, the helper, the quiet kid who didn't cause problems. You got approval for being efficient, focused, capable, whatever version of you the adults needed most. And even if no one said it out loud, the message was clear. You are easier to love when you're doing something that benefits others. Over time, those patterns didn't just shape your behavior, they shaped your identity. You didn't just work hard, you became someone who had to work hard. You didn't just push through, pushing through became your personality. Even now, when you try to slow down, something in you panics. Because without the constant doing, who are you? This is the trap. When performance becomes survival, you lose the ability to rest without guilt. Productivity becomes not just a habit, but a shield. And you're scared to put it down, because somewhere deep inside you still believe that if you stop proving your worth, you'll disappear. That's why you call yourself lazy. It's not because you're lazy, it's because somewhere along the way you absorbed a brutal lie, that your energy is a moral currency, and if you're not using it to produce something, you're failing. This belief isn't your fault. It was built into the world around you. You were raised in systems that only noticed you when you were useful. Families that loved you more when you were easy. Schools that measured your value in test scores and compliance. Workplaces that call burnout a badge of honor. Platforms that reward you for being endlessly visible but punish you for being real. You were never taught how to rest. You were taught how to crash. You were taught how to suppress your needs until they boiled over. You were taught to ignore the early whispers of your body and only listen when it started screaming. So now, even in moments when you know you need rest, it doesn't feel like rest. It feels like failure. It feels like you're falling behind. It feels like betrayal. And that's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because the voice in your head telling you to do more isn't even yours. It belongs to the culture. It belongs to the conditioning. It belongs to the systems that turned your nervous system into a performance machine and then blamed you when it broke. And maybe the hardest part of all is this: the more you struggle, the more invisible it feels. Because people don't see the inner war. They just see what looks like inactivity. They see someone scrolling, sleeping, avoiding. They don't see that you're drowning in a fog of shame, guilt and confusion. They don't see that behind your so-called laziness is a terrified, overextended self who has been trying to earn their right to exist for so long, they don't even know how to stop. This isn't just exhaustion. It's exile. Exile from your own body. Exile from your right to pause. Exile from a version of you that was once allowed to be. Not because you were useful, but because you were enough. And until you name this trap for what it is, you will keep blaming the symptoms instead of healing the root. You will keep calling it laziness, when it was always just survival. The human nervous system was never built for this, not for the constant measuring, not for the relentless demand to prove, produce and perform. It was built for safety, for attunement, for connection, for rhythm. But somewhere along the way, survival stopped being about shelter and warmth and belonging, and started becoming about output. And in the process, millions of people were taught to betray their biology in order to meet an invisible standard that only ever moves further out of reach. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han writes that we no longer live in a disciplinary society where others crack the whip. We live in a performance society where we whip ourselves. We are no longer subjects to external force. We are entrepreneurs of the self, exploiting ourselves in the name of freedom. And burnout isn't a sign of failure. It's the logical conclusion of self-optimization. This is why your exhaustion doesn't come with compassion. It comes with shame. Because you weren't just taught to do things, you were taught to be someone. Someone efficient, someone focused, someone useful. The pressure is no longer do your job, it's be productive or you're nothing. So when your body begins to slow down, when your mind resists yet another task, it feels like identity collapse, like failure, like a betrayal of the self you were trained to maintain. But this isn't just philosophical theory, it's neurological reality. When your nervous system is in a chronic state of fight, flight, or freeze, it reallocates energy from long-term planning and reflection into survival-based reactions. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, motivation, focus, goes offline. Your body isn't malfunctioning, it's reprioritizing, from thriving to surviving. And here's what no productivity coach will tell you. What looks like procrastination is often a freeze response, a shutdown. Not a conscious choice to be lazy, but a protective mechanism learned from early environments where safety wasn't consistent, where perfection was the price of love, where stillness meant rejection, where approval was a lifeline. Dr. Gabor Mate calls this the wisdom of trauma, that what you call dysfunction is actually adaptation. The collapse is intelligence. The fatigue is data. The withdrawal is a message from your body saying, I've had to carry too much for too long. And if you grew up in an environment where your emotional needs weren't met, where you were praised for achievement but not held in your pain, you likely learned to link productivity with love. The more you did, the safer you felt. The less you did, the more vulnerable you became. That pattern doesn't vanish in adulthood. It just gets more expensive. Because now you don't just burn yourself out for approval, you burn yourself out for identity, for safety, for a sense of being real in a world that only sees you when you're producing. But this isn't your fault. It's the natural outcome of what philosopher Erich Fromm described as the shift from a being society to a having society, where your worth is no longer grounded in who you are, but in what you can offer. But Fromm warned that this would lead to a spiritual emptiness, a quiet despair that arises when people feel like commodities in their own lives. And he was right. You don't feel exhausted because you're lazy. You feel exhausted because the version of you that everyone admires is the one that's slowly killing your spirit. The one who never says no, the one who smiles while collapsing, the one who gets things done at the cost of their own inner life. And the cruelest part? The more you perform this version of yourself, the more people expect it, the more they validate the mask and overlook the person underneath. So of course you're tired, not just physically, but existentially, because you've spent years building a self that's impressive but not integrated. A self that succeeds but doesn't feel safe. A self that functions but doesn't feel alive. And that's not your failure. It's the failure of a system that made survival feel like success. This isn't just about you, this exhaustion you carry, this shame that wraps itself around rest. It isn't an individual defect. It's the emotional inheritance of a culture that turned survival into branding and rest into weakness. You are not malfunctioning. You're responding exactly the way a human being would respond to a society that monetizes your every moment, pathologizes your pauses, and convinces you that your value is directly tied to how much you produce before you break. You were born into a machine that worships the hustle, a society that celebrates burnout as if it's a rite of passage, as if running yourself into the ground is proof of your potential. You're praised when you say yes to everything, respected when you sacrifice your weekends, admired when you keep showing up, even when your eyes are hollow and your spirit is gone. This is not just a cultural glitch, it's a design. The modern workplace thrives on your overextension. It depends on your inability to rest. If you were to truly slow down, if you were to listen to your body, honor your limits, stop overcommitting, stop proving, entire industries would collapse. Productivity isn't just a value in this society, it's a moral code. And anyone who breaks it by being still, by being soft, by being human, is quietly shamed and slowly erased. This system doesn't just reward action, it punishes stillness. You've been trained to associate your worth with your usefulness. You've been trained to mistake exhaustion for excellence. You've been trained to perform even when you're falling apart, because somewhere along the way you learned that being burned out earns more praise than being balanced. But let's name this for what it really is: systemic nervous system abuse. A cultural conditioning that exploits your biology until you confuse collapse for character flaw. And it runs deep. It's in the language we use. Lazy, unmotivated, disappointing. Words that don't ask what happened to you, just what you failed to accomplish. It's in the way we talk about time, wasting time, using time wisely, maximizing every minute, as if your value can be calculated down to the second, as if your life is a spreadsheet, as if rest is only justified when it can be converted into later productivity. It's even in how we talk about healing. Self-help has become its own form of labor. Even your recovery must now be optimized, tracked, marketed, posted. We tell people to take a break, but only if they come back better. We offer mental health days, as long as they don't interfere with performance. Even rest has become something you're expected to do well. This is what happens when capitalism collides with identity. You become a brand, a product, a performer. You're encouraged to be yourself, but only if yourself is aesthetically pleasing, emotionally controlled, and endlessly productive. If your softness gets in the way of your function, you're told to cut it off. And what do you do when you can't keep up? When your body starts breaking down, you don't ask what's wrong with the system. You blame yourself. You internalize the shame. You double down. You buy another planner, read another book, push harder. Because that's the final trap. The culture exploits you until you collapse. And then it convinces you that it was your fault. So no, you're not lazy. You're not broken. You're not defective. You're living in a world that treats rest as rebellion and shame as motivation. And it's slowly killing the part of you that remembers what it means to be a person instead of a machine. Your body was the first thing to protect you. Long before you had language. Long before you had a job. Long before you could explain what you were feeling. Your body was already learning how to survive. Not just from physical threats, but from emotional ones. From disapproval, from rejection, from feeling like a burden, from never being enough. If you were raised in an environment where love felt conditional, your body adapted by becoming hyper-aware of what others needed you to be. You learned to scan for tension, to anticipate needs, to shrink your own feelings, to achieve, to perform. Because every smile you received after getting something right became a lifeline. Every sigh of disappointment became a warning. And over time, your body concluded one thing: staying safe means staying useful. This wasn't a conscious choice. It was nervous system intelligence. Polyvagal theory tells us that the body constantly scans for safety or danger. When safety is absent, not just physically but emotionally, your body activates survival responses: fight, flight, freeze or fawn. And these patterns don't disappear when childhood ends. They become the operating system for adulthood. That's why stillness feels wrong, why slowing down makes your chest tighten, why resting triggers guilt. It's not laziness, it's biology. Your system doesn't associate rest with restoration. It associates it with risk. Because when you were young, being still may have meant being ignored. Being playful may have led to punishment. Being visible might have triggered withdrawal. So your nervous system learned: stay busy, stay approved, stay safe. And that learning didn't stop. It just evolved. Now you work longer hours than your body can manage. You skip meals and call it discipline. You ignore exhaustion and call it focus. You collapse and then call it failure. Not because you're weak, but because your inner wiring still believes that slowing down could cost you everything. What no one told you is that survival mode doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like overachievement. Sometimes it looks like the friend who always says yes, the student who never complains, the employee who never misses a deadline. Sometimes survival looks like success. Until it doesn't. Until the body can't keep carrying the weight of your coping strategies. until the anxiety stops pushing you forward and starts paralyzing you, until the same behaviors that once made you feel in control now leave you hollow, exhausted, ashamed, number. And here's the cruel irony. The moment your body collapses, the moment it finally demands rest, is the moment your inner critic gets the loudest. Instead of compassion, you give yourself judgment. Instead of space, you give yourself pressure. Instead of listening to your nervous system, you try to override it, again and again. But biology doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your deadlines. It doesn't care about your to-do list. It only cares about survival. And if you've been running on nervous system overload for years, then what you're calling laziness is actually a last-ditch effort by your body to save itself. This is the wisdom of your shutdown. It is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of how long you've gone without feeling safe. There comes a point where even survival doesn't work anymore. You wake up and feel like a stranger to your own life. Everything around you keeps moving. Emails, expectations, people asking things of you, but you can't find yourself inside it anymore. Your ambition is gone. Your hunger is gone. Even your fear is quiet now. There's just this weight, this tiredness that doesn't go away with sleep, this hollow ache that no amount of planning, producing, or pretending seems to touch. It's not just burnout. It's something deeper. It's the realization that the self you built, the high-functioning, always-on, achievement-driven version of you, was never really you. It was a survival strategy. It was a mask. It was a performance. And now it's cracking. Because there's only so long a nervous system can run on borrowed time. There's only so long a soul can carry the weight of who it had to become. And when it breaks, when the doing stops, when the mask slips, when the urgency fades, what's left behind is silence. And in that silence, you're left with everything you tried to outrun. The childhood self who still thinks love must be earned. The teenager who buried their joy to become reliable. The adult who can't look in the mirror without hearing the voice that says, "You're not doing enough." You look at your life and wonder, who was I building this for? And maybe the worst part isn't that you're tired. It's that you're tired of being tired. Tired of constantly pushing. Tired of never arriving. Tired of chasing a version of enough that always moves just out of reach. You tried so hard to become someone admirable, but all you feel is absence. Like you disappeared somewhere along the way. Like all you're doing swallowed your being. And yet, the shame still lingers. Even now, as you break, there's a voice inside you saying you don't get to rest. Not yet. Not until you've earned it. But you never will. Because the kind of rest your soul is asking for isn't the kind you earn. It's the kind you remember. It's the kind you were born deserving, but taught to forget. This is the cost of survival mode. It keeps you alive, but not whole, not free, not real. And until you face that, until you feel the weight of how much of yourself you've lost to productivity, to shame, to pretending, there can be no healing. There can only be the slow collapse, the quiet grief, the realization that what you've called success was built on self-abandonment, and no amount of discipline will save you from a life that doesn't let you rest. What if rest was never the problem? What if everything you've hated about yourself, every shutdown, every delay, every so-called lazy moment, was just a nervous system doing its job? Just a body asking for gentleness in a world that only gave you pressure? Because here's the truth, the shame you carry is not yours. It was planted in you, handed down by systems, by families, by cultures that couldn't hold your softness, so they tried to replace it with discipline. They couldn't honor your needs, so they trained you to ignore them. They couldn't celebrate your being, so they only affirmed your doing. But there is a version of you underneath all that, a version who was never lazy, never broken, never behind, just scared, just tired, just waiting to feel safe enough to stop performing. And that's what healing begins to offer. Not a new system to make you better, but a new language to recognize when you're already whole. When your body says, "I can't," healing doesn't say, "Push harder." It says, "I hear you." When your mind goes quiet and your drive disappears, healing doesn't call you lazy. It asks what you've been carrying that was never yours to hold. You are not a machine. You are not a brand. You are not a productivity system waiting to be optimized. You are a living, breathing, feeling human being. And if the pace of your life doesn't allow you to be one, then it's not your discipline that needs fixing. It's the terms of your existence. You were never meant to hustle for worth. You were never meant to collapse just to prove you were trying. You were never meant to fight your own biology for the right to belong. Your body is not your enemy. Your exhaustion is not a failure. Your rest is not a sin. It's okay to stop. It's okay to feel heavy. It's okay to say, this pace doesn't work for me anymore. Because the part of you that collapses isn't weak. It's the part that still remembers softness. It's the part that knows, I was meant to be more than what I produce. I was meant to feel peace without earning it. This isn't about giving up. It's about finally coming home. If any part of this spoke to you, let it. You don't have to rush to fix it. You don't have to turn this video into another task. Just sit with it. Let the shame loosen its grip. Let the stillness feel a little less dangerous. Let your breath come back into your body, slowly, gently, in your own time. And if you're ready, I want to invite you to reclaim something. In the comments, just write, I'm allowed to rest. That's it. No explanation, no justification, just those 4 words. It's not for me, it's for you. It's a ritual, a line in the sand, a moment where you stop apologizing for what your nervous system has always known, that you were never meant to earn your worth, that you're not a machine, that you deserve to exhale. And when you see someone else write those words, pause, take it in, because they're doing what you're doing, relearning how to live, how to belong, how to rest. You don't have to do it alone. And if this is something you need more of, you know where to find me. You've got nothing to prove here. You've already survived more than most people can see, and you're still here. That's not laziness. That's courage.